Hello friends, today we will be talking about the evolutionary history of horse. This comes under the vertebrate paleontology, and this module and the series of modules we will be discussing in this lecture is very useful for from the viewpoint of the competitive examinations. The record of evolution of horse is very well documented and is known for its completeness. Though stratigraphical records are very rarely complete, fossil records provide the best known evolutionary series among all the invertebrates and vertebrates. That means the evolution of horse is recorded very well into the stratigraphical record if you compare the same with the evolution of the vertebrates and invertebrates, and was the first studied about more than 100 years ago by the pioneer Russian paleontologist Vladimir Kovalevsky. Basing his studies on the European fossil genera, he concluded that Eohippus, Anchitherium, Hipparion and Equus formed a line of descent, and that was a brilliant approach, although his conclusion has been substantiated by later research. The forms he had at his disposal actually proved to be offshoots from the principal evolutionary events that occurred in North America. Major part of the evolution took place in North America, from where remains of horses have been found in great abundance, where in the floodplain deposits. Why they occur in floodplain? The reason where they occur in floodplain is because floodplains are vegetated, and these vegetated floodplains provide ample food resources for the horses. So, they remain there, they eat and flourish there, and they die, and they get deposited in the floodplain itself, because of which most of the horse fossils have been found into the floodplain deposits. Fossil remains comprising skull fragments. What will be preserved in the horse? Certainly not the soft parts, but the skull of the horse, jaws of the horse, teeth of the horse, limb bones means legs of the horse, and other skeletal remains. They are known from the strata, and the age of this strata is from early Eocene to the Pleistocene. Many genera and species are good index fossils and are used in age determination of the rocks which enclose them. Equine evolution is essentially a straight line evolution or orthogenesis. Straight lines means they do not have branches, one after the other after another. So, you do not have branches, it moves in a linear way, and because of which it is best known for the orthogenetic studies. In other words, only little variation can be accounted. Almost a linear trajectory is usually identified from Hyracotherium to the modern horse. It must be emphasized that the horse disappeared in Pleistocene as a result of the cold climate in North America, which was its evolutionary home, but it migrated to Eurasia before it came or became extinct. Present day horses seen in the North America was reintroduced from the old world, although the history proper has its beginning in the genus called as Hyracotherium, which was formerly called as Eohippus. These forms themselves are credited with being descendants of an extinct order known as Condylarthra, which flourished during the earliest epochs of the Tertiary. The Paleocene. One Condylarth genus, which is called as Phenacodus in a particular, shows evidences of the probable ancestry to the Hyracotherium. Although it was anything but horse-like in appearance, smaller than the smallest pony, these animals had 5 toes on each foot, each toe being provided with small hoof. Probably they walked on the soles of their feet, not on the toes as do the horses. Since no intermediates exist between the Phenacodus and Hyracotherium, however, the proposed relationship still remains conjectural. In contrast, there are few problems over the lack of the intermediates in the horse family itself. The earliest representative stock, that is Hyracotherium, occurred throughout North America and Eurasia during the Eocene epoch, more than 50 million years ago. In fact, the genus has also been reported from the Paleocene of Wyoming, where rocks of this epoch form a series of strata totaling about 3,500 feet in thickness. Members of this genus also were far from being horse-like in appearance and in structure. They were small animals about the size of a fox terrier or with relatively short legs. That means what that means. The most interesting aspect of this lecture is that it lets you think that the earliest horses were like goats. They were not like horses. So, from the goat level size, and it doesn't had hoofs, it had toes. So, you can imagine the early horse appearance looking like a goat, small goat, and with the 5 toes. With time, it kept on increasing, evolving in size and strength, and the number of toes started decreasing, and it became converted into very strong hoof on which it can gallop. On each forefoot, 4 toes were present, whereas on the hind feet, 3 toes are present. Each toe was provided with a small hoof. Each foot, however, digit 3 was larger than others, suggesting that it bore great proportion of the weight. A comparative study of the horse foot by C. L. Camp and N. Smith concludes that the foot of Hyracotherium must have been supported by the pad from those of such forest dwelling ungulates such as the tapir. Furthermore, the muzzle was not elongate, the eyes having been located near the middle of the skull length. The molars had short crowns, prolonged roots, and cusps like human teeth of this type. Hence, it is believed that the mammals were browsers, feeding on the succulent shrubs and other soft vegetation. They probably escaped the predators of the times by concealing themselves in the bush of the forest in which they seem to have lived, rather than by running as do the plains-dwelling descendants. The brain, too, while quite unhorse-like, was relatively simple. Beyond this early level in the equine evolution, a great many representative types exist at the same time, but it is not necessarily to discuss each of them in turn. Instead, attention may be focused on the trends of the changes that occurred. These various trends neither necessarily proceeded at the same time nor have the linear direction, because much branching and side speciations are found at all levels, even when they are not mentioned further in the foregoing account. Perhaps the most dramatic, if not the most important, series of the changes is found in the feet and limbs, which slowly became perfected as an adaptation for the fleetness in evading predators. In proceeding the upward through the time sequence of fossils, one notices that the limbs become increasingly longer and stronger in proportion to the body size. Actually, lengthening was confined mostly to the lower or the distal bones, the upper ones or the humerus or femur remaining comparatively short. The evolutionary trends that characterized equine evolution through Cenozoic era are going to be discussed and are as follows. That means increase in size, lengthening of the legs and feet, reduction in lateral toes with emphasis on the middle one, molarization of the premolars, increase in the height and crown of the cheek teeth, progressive complication of the enamel pattern on crown surface, lengthening of the face and front of the eyes from accommodation of high crown cheek teeth. Actually, the reason why the number of toes they declined in the evolutionary time is that when increasing height, when they took height, the weight increases, and as the weight increases, they need to be handled and balanced on some very firm hoof, and it was better to evolve hoof rather than retaining those 5-toe systematics. We will now be discussing about the Eocene horses in this module. There was a warm and moist climate, warm and humid climate with a lot of vegetation. Naturally, humid climate would lead to a huge rainfall, and the huge rainfall would support a thick vegetation. So, this warm and humid climate and thick vegetation is correlated. The first horses belong to the early Eocene genus Hyracotherium, known from North America. The contemporaneous horses known from Europe were assigned to the genus Eohippus. In early Eocene, horses were widespread throughout the North America and Europe, and probably within Asia as well. It has been suggested that by the end of early Eocene time, the North America and Europe once again separated by a water barrier. Hyracotherium became extinct in the Old World, and the evolution of horses was limited in the North American continent. All the horses that appeared subsequently in other regions in Eurasia and South America were immigrants from the North America. Then comes the Hyracotherium or Eohippus, that means the very early horse. It was a little browsing animal, only 11 inches in height. Can you imagine? A horse worth only 11 inches, approximately the size of a cat, having arched flexible back with long tail. I was telling you that it was of the size of a goat, but if you see it closely and approximately or absolutely, it was started from the size of a cat. The face was not elongated in front of the eyes as we do get in modern horses. There were 4 functional toes in front and 3 in the hindfoot. In addition, the animal had primitive skull with low crowned cheek, teeth represented by premolars and molars. None of the premolars were molariform, and cusp patterns on the crown was simple with a few cross lobes. Next horse is known from the mid-Eocene strata of North America and is called as Orohippus, whose last or 4th premolar was molariform, which is a character that makes it more advanced or little advanced over the previous horse Hyracotherium. Next horse is Eohippus. Eohippus is known from the late Eocene strata and was slightly longer than Hyracotherium and Orohippus. There is an evidence of an increase in the length of the middle toe and was a tendency of reduction of the side toes. 4th toe was in the process of disappearance. 3rd and 4th premolar was molariform. Then comes the Oligocene horses. Oligocene was the time of marked aridity due to a large continental uplift. A few streams were left, and the horses were to run faster for survival and to get food. They have therefore acquired evolutionary character along the line, ultimately leading to 3-toed horses during Oligocene. Then the Oligocene horses, among the Oligocene horses, we have the most prominent one as Mesohippus. Mesohippus lived during early and mid Oligocene and was smaller than sheep or goat. That means even Oligocene horses were smaller than goats, having 3 functional toes in both front and hindfoot. The cheek teeth was still crowned. Then comes another horse, that is Myohippus. Myohippus lived during the mid and the late Oligocene and attained the size of a sheep. Now, Myohippus attained the size of the goat or the sheep. There were 3 toes in each foot, and the growth of the middle one went faster. That means one toe was increasing in size to be converted into hoof, and the lateral toes were reducing in size. Skull was elongated and eyes were situated more posteriorly. 3 premolars were molariform and cheek teeth were still low crowned. After Oligocene comes the Miocene horses. Due to uplift of the Rocky Mountains in North America, a lot of fine sand and silt was deposited in the floodplain. At that time, grasses were expanding and were siliceous. Horses of that time acquired characters in response to siliceous grasses. Cement was added for the first time, and the first true hypsodont horses appeared in the late Miocene. More complicated enamel pattern on the crown surface was developed. Grazing horses appeared in the Miocene, to be very frank. Then comes the next series of horses, that is Parahippus. Parahippus is known from early and mid Miocene. Early Miocene or mid Miocene strata is found in India as Sivalix and was very much like the Myohippus in general appearance. The characteristic feature is that the cement was added for the first time to the teeth. Middle toe was elongated, side toes far above the ground, lengthening of the crown, all the premolars became molariform, skull was more elongated, there was further connection of the cross lobes on the crown. Then comes the Merychippus. Merychippus slightly increased in size over the Parahippus, but was much similar to it. It was the first true hypsodont horse. Low pattern on the crown was much like the modern horse. Protocone just touched the main body to the tooth. It was three-toed horse. Side toes were far above the ground and was functionally only one-toed horse. This was the one-toed horse. Then in the next series comes the Hypohippus. It was a horse that evolved from an Anchitherium ancestry in the beginning of the mid-Miocene. It reached Eurasia, where it survived in a short time in Miocene. It was large and heavy in build, teeth was a still low crown, side toes were relatively heavy. Then comes in the sequence Pliocene horses. There were stretches of the grasslands in the North America and grazing horses appeared in the large numbers. New land bridges across the arose where none had existed for ages and great faunal changes were recorded. Next horse is a Hipparion. Hipparion was a grazing horse with a long skull. Hipparion was a three-toed horse but functionally only one-toed. Teeth had a complicated enamel pattern. Protocone was separated from the main body of the teeth. Hipparion invaded from Eurasia into the North America. Next is Pliohippus. Pliohippus is much like modern horses in appearance, and Pliohippus attained the size of a horse. In the beginning, Pliocene, an advanced species of the Merychippus, gave rise to the Pliohippus, in which side toes were missing, and it was a true one-toed horse. Low pattern on the crown surface was very much like modern horse. Protocone was connected to the main body of tooth. Nearly the end of the Pliocene, when North and South America again connected by the land after 74 million years of separation, Pliohippus migrated to the South America, where it gave rise to the Hipparion. In early Pleistocene, Hipparion became the extinct in South America. Then comes the Equus. Equus means the horse, the real horse. The horse Equus represents the latest stage of evolution. It appeared in the late or at the base of the Pleistocene in North America and Europe. That means the horses have North American or European affinity, and from where they migrated worldwide. Equus is one-toed horse where the side toes are reduced to node-like structures which are converted or covered by skin. Equus became extinct in the North America in Pleistocene, but migrated into Eurasia before it became extinct. After discussing about many types of the horses, we will now discuss the evolution of the horse brain. Since browsing animals can feed on vegetation at normal eye level, an elongated muzzle of the little advantage to them, but to grazers feeding in heavy grasses with the head close to the ground level. A higher location of the eyes on the head would hold a distinct selective advantage in watching for an approaching predator. That means the safety. Among much early grazer, grazing horses such as the Merychippus, the muzzle had already elongated somewhat, so that the eye was noticeably behind the middle skull's length. Later, this trend progressed rapidly, so that in equus the eye had reached a location approximately at the posterior third of the skull. The changes that have occurred in equine brain structure are less thoroughly documented, but the trends in general agree with those of the other sequences. Earlier, the brain of the Hyracotherium had been described as being extremely primitive like that of the opossum, which is a smooth and fissure-less. However, there is no sound basis to believe that a later study shows the brain to have small, so that the cerebrum did not cover the anterior portion of the cerebellum as in modern horses. However, it had three fissures that characterized Orohippus and Mesohippus. The cerebrum of the member of the former genus was smaller in structure, but was somewhat larger. With Mesohippus, the brain had increased considerably in extent, so that it overlay much of the anterior cerebellum. Although the longitudinal fissures were still relatively unchanged, the frontal lobe was enlarged and complexly folded trends further in the Myohippus considerably. As time went on and the other equine traits evolved, the folds became more complex until the highly convoluted condition of the modern equus had been acquired. It should be noticed that the browsers did not immediately died out after the advent of the grazers, but persisted into the Pliocene also. Furthermore, contrary to the general principles of evolution, the main body of the evolution occurred in the North America, which was probably largely tropical or subtropical at least into the Miocene period, rather than in the equally warm extent of the Eurasia. On the latter continent, the several genera that occasionally arrived from the New World did undergo evolution and developed distinct genera, but they differed from the North American representatives only in minor ways, and in each case became extinct without leaving the descendant forms. Similarly, the several branches that reached South America during the Pliocene and again in the Pleistocene radiated briefly before undergoing extinction. Perhaps the oldest event of all, however, is that the entire American line became extinct in recent times, while in the Old World, wild asses, horses and zebras still persist. Some of the first perissodactyls were horses, is what we can conclude, no larger than the terrier admittedly, but the first in what has come to be regarded as an evolutionary classic. Major changes may be observed during the history of the horses, a reduction in the number of toes from 4 and 3 in the first toe, Hyracotherium, to 3 in the Mesohippus and 1 in the Pliohippus, and independently in modern equus, and a deepening of the cheek teeth from small leaf crushing molars to the deep rooted grass grinders of the modern horses. The changes in the limb structure or the leg structure and teeth are linked to the overall increase in the body size, and that occurred during the horse evolution. The major changes have been explained by the major environmental change that took place during the later Oligocene and early Miocene. The spread of the grasslands of the North America. Early horses such as Hyracotherium, Mesohippus and Parahippus were browsers that fed on leaves from bushes and low trees. As the forest retreated and grasslands spread, new horse lineages such as the Merychippus and Hipparion stepped out into the plants and put their reinforced molars to work. This radiation happened relatively rapidly, about between 75 to 15 million years, that is the early mid-Miocene in the North America, and rather later elsewhere. As Hipparion migrated into the Old World in the late Miocene, that is 10 million years ago, and eventually in South America when Hipparion entered 3.5 million years ago during the Great American Interchange Hyracotherium was a cryptic animal that escaped predators by being small and blended into the background. On the open grasslands, the Miocene horses evolved long limbs, perhaps to save on energy cost in locomotion. Long legs and single hooves allowed the later horses to achieve great speeds. Long limbs were not needed to escape predators because wolf-like carnivores evolved only in the latest tertiary. The dental changes were brought out on by the major switching in the diet from leaves to the grasses. Grasses contains a very high proportion of silica, is very abrasive, and feeding on the grasses also introduces grit in the mouth. Grazers need high crown teeth that last for a long time, and they usually have complex infolding of enamel and dentine to provide a better grinding surface. The story of the horses has become a textbook example of progressive evolution or trend, as there seems to be a greater clear-cut one-way line of the change from small leaf-eating Hyracotherium to the large grazing Equus. But there is no evidence for the uniform change, and the pattern of evolution is rather more complex than it might be at the first sight. There was no single line of evolution, in fact, from the Hyracotherium to the Equus, and many sideline branches off in the Oligocene and Miocene. As you would have seen in the evolution of horses, that it started from the size of a cat to the size of the horse. There have been many changes, but these changes have been under some constraints. The constraints of the changing landform from the forest to the grasslands, the silica, it led to the intensification of the molars from grazing grasses to eating the silica rich material. And then the reduction in the number of toes is because of the increasing size and weight. So, the toes reduced to the strong hooves and the size increased. So, this is the best example of the straight line evolution. Hope you would have learned something for the evolution of horses. Thank you very much.